Okay, and we are live. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on our Meet the Scientists question and answers series. These series are leading up to our citizen science, marine citizen science event that's next week on the 27th of September from 10 to 12 Central European Time, where we'll discuss how this Into the Deep project and the marine citizen science, other marine citizen science initiatives that are happening. So if you want some more information about that, you can check out our Instagram page, and there's more information on one of our posts. Today, I'd like to introduce Autun, who's joining us. Thanks for being here. And yeah, and before I give him the stage, I just want to mention that these live streamings, they're also recorded. So if you miss it, you didn't get the chance to join in, then you can always, they'll be posted on our social media and on our YouTubes and LinkedIn as well. So you'll be able to catch it up there as well in case you missed it. So without further ado, I'll leave the floor to you, Autun.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Caroline. So hi, everybody. I'm a deep sea ecologist working at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany. It's the German Polar Institute, and we go to lovely places like here behind me, the Antarctic ice shelf, and also work in the Arctic. We do two sorts of work. We explore the areas, new areas that haven't been looked at before, and also we monitor how things are changing. And my particular role is to monitor how things are changing on the seafloor. And I do that by towing cameras through the water and photographing the seafloor and seeing what animals are living there and maybe how the animals are changing over time, or by leaving cameras on the seafloor and then picking them up the next year or something like that and seeing what is recorded. And with the Into the Deep project, I'm putting some of my data onto the portal being developed by the project, so people can label some of the fish that we've seen in an area near Norway, and we can see how fishing exclusion zones are working in the high north, for example. And yeah, so that's what I really do. I'm a sort of ecologist, but sort of also a technologist. What made you decide to be a marine researcher? Someone asks. Well, that's a really good question. So in my early 30s, I was working at MTV, the music television channel, and I was getting a bit bored of just doing TV. So I started doing open university courses, distance learning courses, and I did one on ocean science, which I really enjoyed. And I decided, I really liked doing it. And then I slowly built towards doing that. So I slowly left TV. And instead of transmitting Kylie Minogue to the satellite, I decided to transmit fish from the seafloor to the ship. And then I would see how the fish and animals are changing over time. So it's just a general interest that I picked up on in my 30s, and I just carried on with that. What do you find most interesting about your topic? Well, that's another good question. So, I mean, we're really lucky. We've got this big icebreaker that we can use to smash through the ice to get to places which no one has ever been to before with the modern sort of cameras that we have now. So my big camera weighs 1 ton. It's basically a very fancy camera, just like you would have at home, but it's in a metal case and goes to the seafloor. And when I put this in the water, I'm virtually always the first person to see an area with such a good piece of equipment. So we're really exploring and finding new things. That's what I really find exciting, discovering new types of things. For example, new sorts of underwater volcanoes in the high Arctic, or arrays of many, many nesting ice fish like we found in Antarctica, deep underneath the Antarctic ice. So I think that's what I like the most. I never know what I'm going to see when I go to work on the ship. Yeah, so someone asked me, am I an artist? Well, I'm an illustrator of sorts. I like to draw what I'm seeing, be that the creatures that we collect sometimes, or locations like this one. And in this case, I've put the latitude and longitude of when I saw this ice shelf in Antarctica. It's like a 60-meter high ice where you meet the ice that comes from the land. That's what this is behind me. And I like to draw these things and make postcards from them and things like that. So it's a sort of hobby illustration. And I think that rather than a camera where you just look up and take a photograph, if you're drawing it, you really take into account the details. For example, how regular the cracks are on the ice behind, but particularly with biology, how many legs it's got, how the legs are hanging together, I find that really interesting and a good combination of illustration and science. What's the most difficult thing about communicating your science? That's a really good question, and I have it much easier than some scientists because, I mean, although global warming is very important, what they're measuring is basically a small increase in temperature or a slight change in the way that the flow conditions are going in an area. Whereas with my work, I'm photographing an area which may have completely different biology as the water warms up. That's happening in the Arctic, in Norway, in the shallow fjords, for example. The coastal fjords where warmer water is coming in and changing very much the biology that lives there. So my stories sell themselves quite nicely because it's so visual. I think that's the most important thing when communicating your science is you want to be making it presentable to anybody in a way you might be able to discuss it in 20 seconds in a pub or a cafe or something like that, just to get some sound bites across as quickly as possible. I'm lucky in it being images, but most science you should be able to do that. Just have to not bore people with equations and numbers particularly, but try and tell a story that they can identify with. Why do you study this? Why do you study this area in the Arctic? So what we do is one area in the Arctic called the House Garden is in the Fram Strait, which is an area going into the Arctic Ocean where all the water goes up on one side into the central Arctic and down on the other side. And so this is a really good little area to measure how water flow is changing into the Arctic and also the conditions in the water, the temperature and things like that. And also it's the same area where the ice and the icebergs come down. So by going to this very dynamic area every year, we can see how changes are happening and how warmer water is going into the Arctic and how different animals that were in the Atlantic are now moving into the Arctic as the temperature changes. So it's really good to keep going back to the same places to see how these changes are going. How do you get to the Arctic to do your research? That's a good question. So we have the Polar Stern, which is a 115-meter long ice-breaking ship, and it's based in Bremerhaven in North Germany. And we can get on the ship here and sail up to the Arctic, which maybe takes 15 days to get into the ice, or we can fly out and meet the ship as it's driving up there. So what we have is that the ship works in the Arctic in the summer, in the North summer, and then in our winter, in Europe's winter, the ship goes to the Antarctic. So the ship goes back and forth between the two areas. And if it's in Antarctica, I would fly down and meet the ship in Cape Town or South America. What is your longest voyage and do you get seasick? Well, everybody gets seasick. I don't care what the other scientists have said on here. If they say they haven't got seasick, they just haven't met the right wavelength to make them feel seasick. Some people feel very seasick when the waves are going crazy, like in a big storm. And some people, like me, feel seasick if the weather is a long way away in the middle of the ocean and I'm near the edge, then you get this long, slow swell, which I don't like, especially if I'm typing on the computer. But so I take a couple of travel sickness pills the first couple of days, and then I get acclimatized to it very quickly. But I think everybody can get seasick. And my longest voyage so far has been 10 weeks, but this Christmas I go for nearly 12 weeks to the Antarctic. What do you think the best part about incorporating citizen science into your research is? That's a very interesting question. So in this project, Into the Deep, we've had some very vocal people in some of the places that we're working on in this project. They're really interested in their local environment, and I find that quite inspiring. And also they can bring a lot of questions to the scientists. Oh, these people have already noticed something's happening and they'd like to investigate why, so they can really bring things your way. And I also think that you can take a lot of stuff, but they can really help us out by labeling things. Like I take a photograph every 20 seconds and I may be diving for hours and hours. And so I take a lot of images and I can't possibly look through all these images and get all the data analyzed. So they really help out the scientists, citizen scientists, when they're enthusiastic to do so. Also, there's strange things in the world now, like webcams, but underwater. There's some off Canada, for example, where citizens can dial in and look at these underwater cameras, and they can see things like diving whales occasionally. The scientists have never looked at these cameras in great detail because there's just so many of this data now. So citizens are really important for finding this information out, I think. Have you had some good results so far from citizen science participation? Yeah, I think most of my stuff is really starting up. So at the moment, the citizens are helping us look at the fish that are living in trawled areas off Svalbard or Spitsbergen, north of Norway, where trawling has in the past occurred down to the depths of 700 or 800 meters, and now citizens are looking at these images and seeing what fish are living in each area and what animals are on the seafloor and whether these animals are coming back after lots of bottom trawling in the past. So I think that we will have some interesting data, but I haven't had a chance to utilize the citizens' labels yet in this. What's your advice to other scientists about incorporating citizen science into their research? Well, that's a good question. So I think that you really want to get the crux of a question that's interesting to people. It's something that the astronomers have done. For example, they used computers in the 90s to look for signals from outer space. That's one thing they were looking for. So I like that idea. You get people to help by doing one defined task. For example, are there nesting ice fish in this image or not? So maybe the water has changed the location where it was once going over nesting ice fish. Maybe they're going away. So you have some simple question which is easily answered. It's not simple because it doesn't require thought. It's simple because it's a straightforward task and you can really see the results nicely. I think it's very satisfying for the citizen scientists, just like it is for the scientists, to see their data as they make the annotations, the notes on what's in an image, start to form in their head that there is something different. Maybe they've got two sets of data, one area that's been fished and one area that's not. And if you're looking at maybe 4 different sorts of animals in these 2 images, the citizen can quite readily see, oh, there's lots of red fish in this set, but not in this set. And they feel that they're learning something and they're making some useful observations that scientists or legislators can use in the future. So I think that's the key to involving citizens successfully, is to make the work useful and straightforward and with defined goals that can be seen to be leading towards results. Have you ever seen a polar bear? I've seen many polar bears. I've seen small ones, I've seen big ones, I've seen one swimming, and I've seen one last year, very surprisingly, inching across thin ice. The ice was very thin, maybe just maybe an inch. And the polar bear had spread itself very flat and was just sort of sliding along this very thin ice. If he'd walked across, he would have fallen through. So it's very clever and very interesting to see how they behave differently. I've also seen blood-splattered icebergs where polar bears have fed on something. And I've seen a polar bear skeleton or parts of a polar bear skeleton on the seafloor. So yeah, I've seen quite a few polar bears, but it's always interesting. And with polar bears, they're more like this yellow on this shirt than white. When you've got the white snow of the Arctic, much like the Antarctic picture here, it's sort of bluey white, and the polar bear is definitely more yellowy white. So they're actually not that hard to spot against the white background. What's the most exciting thing you've experienced at sea? Well, that's a good question. I've done the Drake Passage where you have these 11 or 12 meter high waves and the ship is going up and down and up and down. That's very dramatic. And then sometimes you can have other things which are really amazing, like in the mid-Pacific, when we're driving at night on a clear starry night, we saw many of these glowing jellyfish as the ship passed through the ocean. It set these jellyfish off glowing. That was really amazing. And then also when we put our equipment in the water at night, the lights can attract things. So I saw the whole sea was full of squids zooming around, attracted to the light, and the things that were also attracted to the light, small fish or whatever that it was to eat. So lots of things like that are exciting. I saw a pretty good eclipse near the North Pole. That was good, where everything got very dark. So that was nice. There's always something exciting to see, I think. One very strange thing we saw was that in Antarctica one time there'd been a bloom of algae. Like the algae really grows quickly when the environmental conditions are right, but then the algae is going to die at some point. And we found the whole of the sea was yellow. That was very strange to see. So that was an interesting thing to see. Things you just do not expect or you don't know about. So that was really interesting. What advice would you give to a person who is thinking about entering the marine science field? Well, It's great. You're certainly not going to be just studying, well, unlikely to be just studying polar bears or seals or whales or something like that. You're probably going to have to do a lot of counting and boring work to start with, but I think you can find lots of pleasures in that. One of the most important things I think now as a marine biologist is to have some sort of awareness of technology. We can get a lot of information from simple cameras made by, for example, these Raspberry Pi computers. You can program in Python a camera to take a photograph once a day for a year and put it in a simple housing and put it on the seafloor. You can do a lot more yourself than you could do a decade ago. So I think that that's a really interesting thing, and will be useful skill to have in the future would be some sort of rudimentary programming skills. And also, we're really at the stage now in biology where we're usually looking to see a pattern in something, be it a change because of global warming or something like that. And to do that, you need to understand statistics. I'm not saying you need to know the mathematics. I'm terrible at mathematics, but you need to understand the tools that you can use to compare a population maybe of penguins on one island and penguins on another island, and to see if these penguin populations are actually changing over time, or it's just your opinion they're changing over time. So to really statistically investigate such questions. So I think that's a really good thing to have a good grasp of statistics when you go into the field. And unfortunately, it's like every other job in the world at the moment. The job security is hard. We only have maybe short-term contracts for the most part. So, but that's every field, I think. So, but if you're enthusiastic, you just have to stick to it and keep going, I think. So try and get as broad skills as possible. What do you use your image data for? So my camera is called the Ocean Floor Observation and Bathymetry System, and it's been developed in Germany over a number of years, and it's been very expensive for the taxpayer. And we have a sort of rule that everything that we collect, every photograph we take, goes to an archive that's publicly available within 2 years of me collecting it. So when I collect some images, I look at them and see if there's anything interesting, a story in there. For example, the first time a certain animal is found in a region. If that's the case, I will maybe write that up and write it for the scientific press, scientific journal. Or I might write about how things have changed since the last time we were here in that particular location. But I will definitely also put this data onto a public archive where it is geotagged, where that photograph was taken from. Then in 100 years or 200 years, if we're still investigating, we can see how the situation was at this particular point. I find that a very satisfying thing to do. I mean, I think that the taxpayers have paid for me to go out and have this nice experience, and it's our duty really to make this data publicly available. Some scientists would worry that they're losing the chance to publish this data because they need to, when it's public, anyone could look at this data and maybe be the first person to notice a fish there. But that's true. But I think there's so much data collected that it's not really a major factor. So, and I think if you found something really exciting, like, for example, these fish that were nesting that we found, we're going to publish that first anyway. So I think it's that's something I really think is good use of our image data, is to put it in the archive for future generations to look at and see how things were at this time point. What is a day in the life of Autun the scientist look like? Well, a day in the life on shore is maybe like most of you guys and girls, getting up, dragging yourself to work and sitting in front of an Excel table, putting in numbers that reflect the counts of the images that we've made, maybe. Or it could be applying for grants, like there's different periods in the year where you can write proposals for money. Be these money to go on a cruise somewhere to run the ship, or be these money to hire PhD students to look at something. For example, there's a lot of interest in the polymetallic nodule mining in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So there's a lot of projects related to that. There's always projects to do with plastic pollution these days. And some of my day would be thinking about how we could put my work into such a proposal. And this can be quite frustrating work, because you can put a lot of work into these proposals over a few months, and then you submit it and it doesn't get funded. So that's like shooting an arrow into the sky, and it might hit something and it might not. So some of your day tasks can be quite boring and maybe not leading anywhere. Another thing we do is, before the cruises, we have to do our packing lists. That's what I'm doing this week. So I have to send to the ship information of every box I'm putting on the ship and the contents of everything in that box, and every serial number of a computer that's going in those boxes. So this is something I have to do before cruises, which is a lot less glamorous than trotting around on the ice or flying in a helicopter. So we have those things. But when we're on the ship, we tend to, I particularly work usually at night, because the thing I do, lowering a camera in the water, doesn't need many deck people to operate. So maybe me and a couple of the crewmen help me to lower the camera, and they winch it up and down to keep it a certain height above the seafloor. And I film all night then. So for me, usually on a ship, dinner is my breakfast and breakfast is my dinner. So usually I would work all through the night, and then I would go to sleep and sleep all day, while on the day people do other things. Maybe they are collecting animals from the seafloor, or collecting mud samples, or whoever what the crew is doing. So every day on the ship is different, but usually for me the day is actually the night time. What do you think the best part about incorporating citizen science into your work is? There's two things I think are important about incorporating citizen science into your work. The first is, like I mentioned before, I think by structuring a research question that a citizen science project can help with, you are really focusing down on what you as a scientist are trying to do. You're not just doing science and investigating an area. You're really addressing a point that you're trying to, the crux of the matter, be it how has the biology changed in the last 5 years in an area, or are these invasive species coming here, or are all the sponges dying now? You're really focusing down onto a few key questions. I really like that in the citizen science projects. And I think that also I feel like my work is mostly funded by citizens, so it's good to be actively involving them in something they may be interested in. So I think that's really good, and I find a lot of satisfaction in that. Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm back. I think that was the last question for this live session. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Autun. That was really interesting. Yeah, before we sign out, once again, just if anybody missed the beginning or wants to watch this again, I'll be posted on our socials. So,
and you can feel free to email me if you want. If I've said something, if you want any more information about anything, or any work you want to do in our CS projects, you can email me directly. That's fine. And thanks a lot, Caroline, for having me on this.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, we can get if you need Autun's contact info, just send us a message and we'll get that to you. That's a good point that you brought up. Yeah. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks again, Autun, and until next time.
Thank you. Bye.